Is this the best Dallas Cowboys offense ever? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That is $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We are answering your Twitter questions today. We've got some really good ones, including what player on the Cowboy needs to take the next step for this franchise to be a Super Bowl contender. Who do we want to win the NFC South? But Landon, I want to start with this one. We've got quite a few people are asking about this Cowboys offense, but do you believe this is the best Dallas Cowboys offense ever?
So in the we have a 30-minute show. So for the sake of brevity, Marcus and I have already kind of pre-primed this conversation a little bit. And I am generally of the thought that I don't like comparing offensive stats or units outside of their own era, right? So I do kind of feel like it's unfair to compare, modern offense to, frankly, even the 90s or the aughts. It's just the offense has changed. The rules have changed so much. So I think that the debate we should probably have is this the best offense for the Cowboys in the last, let's say, 20 years, right? Let's say 2000 is the cutoff, right?
Right, because there were some years with the Landry Cowboys in 68, 70, 77, 80, and 82, where they were the number one scoring offense. So it's hard to judge those offenses against a modern day offense.
Yeah, because I think the last place offense in the NFL probably put bigger numbers up than that 82 team with Danny White. It was so good. So I think starting from let's say 2000, and you and I kind of identified a couple of different spots. Why don't you lay those out real quick of other contenders that we have discussed before?
Yeah, sure. So Quincy Carter and Antonio Bryant in 2000.
That's right.
Okay. Not these guys. I actually think it's easier if we work backwards. So let's go to 2021. The Cowboys were number one in the NFL in points and yards that season. They scored 530 points. CeeDee Lamb was the number one receiver. They also had Amari Cooper, a healthy Michael Gallup. They had Tony Pollard, Ezekiel Elliott. Do you think this current offense is better than that one?
I do, simply because I think that Dak is a better quarterback and he makes up for, any perceived gap that you may have between Cooper and Cooks. I tend to think that this is a more balanced offense with a better quarterback than that group.
I tend to agree. The next one would be 2019. The Cowboys finished so they were 6 in points, number one in yards, missed the playoffs that year.
Yeah, definitely better than that group, I think. I tend to think the 2021 group is better than that 2019
I
group,
agree. 2016, the Cowboys were 5th in points, 5th in yards. That would have been Dak's first year, Dak and Zeke's first year.
Yeah, again, I think 2021 still better than that group, but I would say, to me, I probably rank it 2021, 2016, 2019 in that order.
Now, here's the really hard one. 2014, the Cowboys were 5th in points, 7 in yards. But they could run the ball, and they had Romo, who led the NFL in yards per attempt and passer rating that season.
Yeah, this is the one that you and I both agreed that we felt like this was the group that compare it to. I tend to think that if my memory serves correctly, as that season started to go on, you started to see at the end of the year a start of a decline in DeMarco Murray, and I think that at that point, the offense started to lose some of its potency, because it was a little more, well, not a little more, it was more reliant on the run game than I
Mhm.
think that this offense is. So I tend to think that they're probably comparable throughout the season. But I would say if we were to transport ourselves back to December 13th, 2014, and maybe my timing is bad because there was probably some good December games that Murray had, but I think moving forward, I would feel more confident about this Cowboys team than that Cowboys team. Though I do think that very much those two seasons are comparable as far as overall offensive success.
I want to come back to the 2014 one in just a second, but some other ones that we should mention. The 2007 Cowboys scored.
Yeah.
They were second in the league in points. That's Romo's, or I guess the full year starting, second year starting for the team. They had T.O., they had Marion Barber, they had Terry Glenn at the end of that year. That's the only other one that deserves a mention here.
Yeah, I think so too. And that was a good group as well. I just think that what the Cowboys offense is doing currently right now, the balance they're able to play with, the aggressiveness, it's a mindset change too. I think that has really made a huge difference. This Cowboys offense is just a little bit more dangerous.
So if you go back to the 2014 one, and this is where it's hard. That offensive line was so good, right? You had
Yeah.
Tyron Smith, was that year 4 of Tyron Smith. Travis Frederick by that time was his second year. He was the best center in the NFL. Zach Martin was an all-pro guard right out of the gate. Ronald Leary was your left guard, who was at that stage an above average left guard. And
Very
your
good.
weakest, quote unquote, weakest offensive lineman was Doug Free at right tackle. The offensive line was fantastic, and they were able to control the line of scrimmage and really cover up for their defense by having these really long drives. So that's where I would give the Cowboys advantage. But what you've been able to do with CD and how you can force feed him your offense. And I think Brandon Cooks is just a better player than what Terrence Williams was at that stage. And you've got more depth at receiver. I tend to lean 2023 over 2014.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a more dynamic tight end. I mean, Jason Witten has never been dynamic necessarily. He's been a very good, very useful, very productive tight end, but he's never been. I mean, it's been a long time since, let's say that, he's been a downfield threat the way that you see with Ferguson. I think you pointed it out too. It's not even just like depth pieces. Like the Cowboys have a list of other third option weapons that can come in and provide a different kind of spark that team didn't have. If you think about, we haven't even seen Hendershot yet. We've seen Turpin come in. I think he's got 4 touchdowns, and he shows you that. You can throw in Tolbert, who can be a little bit more like a Gallup alternative. It's just, and then as you see more of Hendershot come in, you've got a fullback you can work in. It's just the Cowboys have more they're not having to concentrate their offense to like 3 or 4 pieces. They can if they need to, but they can also kind of step out and use these kind of auxiliary pieces, weave them into the offense, both in the run and pass game, in a way that you just didn't see that kind of 2016 or 2014 or 2007 offenses really be able to do.
2 more things that the 2023 team has an advantage in is they can move players around. You can play CD outside. You can play in the slot. You can move Cooks around. That team was pretty stationary. Like Dez was your X receiver. Cole Beasley came in and only played the slot. You had Terrence Williams, who could only run certain routes from the outside. And then on top of it, Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer are just way more innovative and more creative than Scott Linehan and Jason Garrett were. They just have different ways they can beat you. So I am giving you the advantage to this group.
Yeah. And again, I think the other part, like we've mentioned, is that eras, or even these eras, are hard to kind of compare because the way defenses are playing offenses now is different than it was back then. And so the need for more creativity is more pronounced now than it was then. So I do think that that is something to keep in mind. But even with all that in mind, I just think this is as good as offenses I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah,
frankly,
I'm with you.
The Cowboys.
Although, man, that Dez 2014 season was a lot of fun.
Was
Scoring as
very
many
fun.
touchdowns as he did. Yeah,
Absolutely.
great. All right, let's talk about which player could step up and really catapult the Cowboys to a Super Bowl run over the next 4 weeks. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That is $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options available, including spreads, player props, over-unders. You can bet on, will the Cowboys be the number one seed? You can bet on, will Dak Prescott win the MVP award? Will Micah Parsons win the Defensive Player of the Year award? You can even sprinkle a little bit on Mike McCarthy, Coach of the Year. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Landon, our next question comes from @Mike_draft21. He says, this team is playing lights out right now, but who is one player that still needs to elevate their game to a higher level to make the Cowboys a Super Bowl contender?
All right, this is a little bit of an unconventional one because I do think that most of your players are playing extremely well right now. I mean, that's why you're having, the success that you are having, I think. If a couple more carries turns into some more production for Rico Dowdle. Now let's say you get a Rico Dowdle who's finally kind of realized his skill set. He's gotten, I think he's at, I'm looking at it now, 75 attempts at this season. So he started to really get into the swing of the season. This is his first year to kind of have this number of carries. I think he's seeing as much action as he's seen in a long time. If he were able to kind of elevate his game a little bit further and provide an even more solid to better, maybe even a better alternative to Tony Pollard at times as a running back, this running game could go to another level than it's been so far. And not that it's been bad, but it hasn't been exceptional by any stretch of the imagination. If the Cowboys running game could really start to kind of rear its head as this season starts to go on, especially as you start to play teams like Buffalo and, teams on the road, and you're going to have to, there's just the high likelihood that you're just not going to get the opportunity to play one of these playoff games on your home turf.
No.
And I think in order to kind of help get into the best situations to, have paths to victory in some of these road games, I think you're going to need to find a way to run the football. Tony Pollard, we've been talking about it, right? I think as the weeks have gone on, he started to get healthier. He started to look better. I think that's been huge. If Rico Dowdle was able to kind of also step up his game in a similar way, be kind of that, thunder to Pollard's lightning a little bit more, I think that this run game could go to places that we hadn't really seen or expected it to go to yet. And I think you saw a little bit of it. There were a couple of runs in that Eagles game that Rico looked good. Like, he was dipping in and out of tacklers, getting positive gains. He looks like he is playing his best football. And I wonder if, he's had some consecutive games played. He's had some carries in all those games. He's starting to get in the swing of things. Is he about to take maybe another step with all this extra attention or opportunity? That would be something that I think would be very beneficial for the Cowboys.
Yeah, this is a good call because I could easily see him having a game coming up of like 12 carries for 82 yards and 2 touchdowns, where he just gets into the open field, makes a guy miss, and scores. And if the Cowboys can start adding this physical element to the run game, because he is a different runner than like Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is very much the make you miss. Finesse isn't the right word, but his game is based off speed and quickness. If you get the guy that's coming downhill and running over your safeties and bringing that physical element to your offense, I agree with you. Like that would be incredible. I'm going to stay on that same side of the ball. Like what if Terrence Steele just gets back to what we saw him playing pre-2022 injury, where he's just
Yeah.
mauling guys in the run game, which, by the way, you started to see that a little bit in
Yeah.
Philly. It's a good test for him over the next couple of weeks because you've got Gregory Rousseau coming up. You've got some pretty good edge rushers with Miami. And then you play the Lions, where he'll see a lot of Aiden Hutchinson on that right side. If he can get back to being a above average right tackle where you don't feel like you have to help him out a bunch, that's how I think this Cowboys offense takes another step.
Yeah, I mean, basically the same kind of area, right? Needing an improved run game, a different player. I think it's a good call. I mean, and another guy that I think is up for it, right? Like as he starts to get further and further away from this injury, you see better and better play. The down blocks that you saw in this last game were devastating. Like he was down blocking Fletcher Cox, and Brico had a couple of different runs where he just run right behind Steele's down block upfield. So yeah, I do think it does seem like we feel like the run game is where there is some improvement to be made, right? Like there's some areas where they have some improvement that they can do. And I think we both feel that there are players that are improving in that area. So I'm excited to see if that does kind of rear itself out.
I'll give you one more on defense. Again, same thing. We started to see him play a little bit better last week. The Cowboys gave Donovan Wilson a pretty good contract this offseason because of what he did last year at the line of scrimmage. The first half of the season was really rough for Dono as he was coming back from the injury. But
calf injuries, man.
Those calf injuries are brutal. But if he can get back to being the player that we saw last year, where he's just a force up front, you play him in the box, he's going to make plays in the run game. You can send him off the edge as a blitzer. He makes plays on the football. That's how I think this defense becomes even more dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, another guy that as he starts to get further away from that injury, you started to see a little bit of a return to form. And yeah, the Cowboys definitely need it. And I think the safeties overall played a very good game on Sunday, but I think specifically Donovan Wilson's a guy that you've needed to his playmaking to kind of come back. And obviously, as you saw on Sunday, it's starting to show itself again.
All right, let's talk about who we want the Cowboys to face from the NFC South. If the Cowboys end up being the 5 seed, we will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the most fun that I've had playing DFS because there's so many different players and stat projections to choose from. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every dayers. On tomorrow's show, we've got the crossover show with Locked On Bills, Joe Marino. Absolutely fantastic. I chatted with him this morning. He couldn't be more excited about this Bills game. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm going to go to it or not. But
you're going. You're going. We're going to make sure you're going.
Bully me into going. So make sure you check out the crossover. A lot of really good stuff there where we even talked about 2022 Dak versus 2023 Josh Allen and how similar their seasons have been so far.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So make sure you tune in for that. All right, Landon. Our last question here comes from Luke. He wants to know, assuming the Cowboys end up as the 5 seed, rank the NFC South teams in order of who you'd like to play the least to the most. Now, before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of an update of where we are in the standings. the Cowboys are pretty likely to be the 5 seed. However, I was playing with the ESPN playoff machine today. If the Eagles were to lose one of the games against the Giants, the Cowboys could slip up in any game and still win the division. So the Cowboys could lose to the Bills this weekend, win the final 3, get in over the Eagles as the 1 or 2 seed. So this Seahawks game is important that Philadelphia is playing coming up, but not quite as important as the 2 Giants games. So those are, just by the way, the games that are really going to have the most impact on whether the Cowboys end up being the 2 seed or the 5 seed.
Now, real quick, this is because I actually don't know this. So it's if they lose to Seattle, the tiebreakers still work, but the Cowboys have to win out, right?
Correct. So if Dallas would be the division winner if they won out and Philly lost to Seattle. Yes.
Okay. And then, so what extra benefit does the Giants loss give us?
If you happen to have the same record, then the Cowboys would get in because they would have the better divisional record. Because the Cowboys are likely to, assuming they beat Washington final week of the season, they'll be 5-1 in the division, or Philly will be 4-2.
Okay, so that all makes sense. I still think that the best way to do it is to get to the 2nd seed and do it that way. So NFC South teams. They're all kind of very tightly packed, and unfortunately, I think our dream of the Carolina Panthers is now dead. But I've kind of gone over this in my head a little bit, and the pros and cons. The Saints to me are the one that I feel like I can't wrap my brain around.
They're the scariest to me because they're the most unknown of the 3.
Yeah. And I do think that they have the best defense, which and then you add in the fact that you might potentially have to play them in New Orleans.
Like on a Saturday night.
Like that's, I don't know, man. Like
there's some weird voodoo that happens.
There's some weird voodoo that happens. There will be a ton of Cowboys fans there, I bet.
That's true.
Because but I do think that that's the one team that I'm like, I don't know if I want to mess with that, right?
No, and like Derek Carr's one of those quarterbacks where he's just so inconsistent. But could I see him having one of those games like he did against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving 2 years ago, where he's just throwing the ball deep on every play, hoping for a pass interference?
Yeah, it's stuff like that I worry about. And look, if we had to play the Saints, I'm not worried.
No, Cowboys
we're talking
7-point favorites.
Yeah. But we're checking. We're if we're deciding who to play, this is the kind of conversations we have. I think for me, it's probably Tampa, right? Like, I just think that the Buccaneers defense has been so bad this year, especially historically compared to how they have been. I remember playing them in the playoffs last year and just feeling like, man, these guys are tired from a long season. These are older veteran guys. I feel like they're playing like they didn't get any rest in the offseason.
No, it's the same defense. Like, and those guys are breaking down. Like Levante David and Devin White didn't play last week. Like, they're already banged up.
Yeah, and then you throw in the fact that it's Baker Mayfield as the quarterback. That seems like a disaster in the making potentially for Tampa Bay. So I would probably pick them simply because I think Atlanta's playing a little bit better football than their record kind of indicates. That offense, I don't know what's going to happen week to week with that offense. Like, maybe Robinson rushes for 250 yards. Maybe Ritter fumbles it 5 times. I have no idea. Like, so I think that for me, I would go with the known, and I know that Tampa Bay is just not up for kind of winning a playoff game at this point, I think.
And I think the crowd in Atlanta and New Orleans would be a lot more difficult to deal with than what you get out in Tampa Bay. Not to say that Tampa Bay fans aren't great, but like, you're in an outdoor stadium. Do you think Buck fans are going to be that excited for a Baker Mayfield playoff game compared to the last few years with Tom Brady? Or do you think that would just be infiltrated with a bunch of Cowboy fans?
I have to say that, like, no matter who it is, like, it just feels like whoever the team is, the NFC South team is like falling into the playoffs backwards. So it's hard to get like super hyped for those teams either way, right?
So I was actually arguing about this last night with our friend Elliot Harrison, and he convinced me that the Falcons are actually a bad matchup for Dallas because they could kind of follow the Cardinals game plan from early in the year, where it's just a lot of
Where they
QB
hurt-
Yeah,
They heard 3 of our offensive linemen in before the game.
a lot of like QB option stuff. One of those games where they have like 14 play drives and there's only 4 possessions each half. The thing for me is like I look at their front seven and it's like, how do they get pressure on Dak in that game? But
how do they stop Dak? Like,
how do they stop Dak?
Yeah.
But they do have a good safety in Jesse Bates and a really good corner in AJ Terrell. Maybe they would figure it out. But I'm with you. You would think with the Cowboys winning last year in Tampa Bay against Tom Brady, there would be a lot of comfort going to do that again. Like I don't think they would be stressed at all to go play Tampa Bay and play Baker Mayfield.
I mean, honestly, you could just it's pretty ridiculous that you could just dust off your game plan offensively from last year and run it, basically. I mean, and on defense, you're not worrying about having to retire the greatest player in the history of the game.
And Baker Mayfield's one of the quarterbacks where he'll hold on to the ball, but he'll also really struggle with pressure. So it fits in well with what the Cowboys want to do on that side of the ball.
Baker Mayfield versus the Cowboys pass rush is like circus level entertainment. It's like they should be playing the organ grinder. It's just, that would be just funny to watch.
And honestly, that's what, if I had to bet today on FanDuel, I think Tampa Bay is the favorite to win the division. I think I landed there as well. I just think the Cowboys match up really well. Their defensive line has not been very good this year. Vita Vea has not played quite as well. Shaq Barrett, I think, is in his 30s now, and he's their number 1 edge rusher. Like,
that's crazy. He's 30.
I know. And the secondary hasn't been good at all. So I think I think I'll go Tampa Bay, Falcons, Saints, just because that Saints team is so doggone weird.
Yeah. I mean, God, they could lose David Carr, and I still wouldn't know whether I felt better or worse about that team, after
David Carr, Derek Carr, does it not matter?
It doesn't matter. Derek Carr, David Carr. You put either of the Carr brothers in there, I'm sure they feel confident in each other's ability and will pick them to win the Super Bowl. But I don't know what will happen, honestly. Like, you put Jameson Winston in there, and it's like it's like volatility was a human being, and it's like, I don't know. Maybe he throws 4 interceptions. Maybe he throws 8 touchdowns. I have no idea. And so I would rather go with the known in Baker Mayfield and a old Tampa Bay defense.
That's why I'm hoping that Tommy Cutlets puts the Saints out of his misery this week. Hey, misery. Later, and I were just talking about the movie Misery before we jumped on. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Again, every day or on tomorrow's show, we've got the crossover with Joe Moreno from Locked On Bills. Make sure you check that out. On Friday, Landon and I back to break down Bills Cowboys in Week 15. You won't want to miss that. Check out our YouTube channel. We post videos every single day over there. Go follow Landon on Twitter @McCoolBCB. I'm @Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.